How does Mr. Ballens pump out so many stories every single week? The guy must live in front of a camera. Anyway, this one, she's got a deadly sixth sense. The person in question, whether this is going to be the killer or the killed, is that even right? Remains to be seen, but Mr. Ballens is going to tell us a story anyway. But before we do get into this, if you do actually like my videos, my reactions to Mr. Ballens, then please hit like and subscribe. It supports me and it supports the channel. Don't forget to follow Mr. Ballens as well, because if it's the first time you've seen him on this channel, then the guy's an amazing storyteller. He also bullies the like button, and we're going to find out what he does there just before the video. Let's get it.
Today, I have 3 really good stories that all in their own way demonstrate that sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction.
Right,
but before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please steal the like button's car and drive it to the busiest 4-way intersection you can find, and simply park it in the middle and then leave.
That's not pissing the like button off. That's pissing everybody off.
Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications.
I'm already subscribed,
so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
Right, let's get into today's story.
Let's get into today's stories.
Because it's a bad habit. Right, let's go.
On the night of September 11th, 1899, a 23-year-old...
What is it with September the 11th? Something bad always happens on September the 11th, even going back into history.
On the night of September 11th, 1899, a 23-year-old student named Alice Knott sat in her bedroom in the Washington, D.C. boarding house where she lived, doing what she did every single night, which was to study. So Alice rarely left her room. She'd spent the last few months preparing to take this really important civil service exam, which she had to pass if she wanted to land the stable government job that she desperately wanted. But studying was not the only reason that Alice seemingly never went out. Alice was also sort of naturally a recluse, in part because she had a lot of health issues. Like a weak heart and poor circulation. She just generally got sick a lot. So being out in the world was really tiring for her, and also sort of scary.
So why does she want a job? Not sounding daft. Why is she going pushing to go and get a job when she's like, she gets tired easily and like has to lie down and stuff? Okay. Interesting.
It was just easier and safer to stay inside. Now, it was getting late in the night, and there was some cold air coming in through her open bedroom window. And it was actually unusually cold outside tonight. And since she got sick pretty easily, she didn't want to risk this draft coming in, giving her a cold or something. So she set her work down for a moment, and she went up to close the window. And then on her way back to her desk, she smiled at the other very important reason that she spent so much time in her room. Her beloved pet parrot, Polly. And Polly was sitting on his typical perch, one of the room's light fixtures, and as he saw Alice approaching, he got really excited and began squawking really loudly. Now, Alice knew that basically any minute now, she was very likely going to hear a loud knock at her door about the loud noise, because most of the people who lived in this boarding house with her hated Polly. And Polly, admittedly, was kind of a mean bird. Not only was he really loud, but he bit people and made really threatening noises and had some bad disruptive habits that pretty much drove everybody who lived in the building crazy. Like right now, Polly, in addition to squawking really loudly, was also pecking the metal frame of the light fixture that it was on, which not only made additional noise, but it also damaged the light fixture.
Is the thing that gets killed in this Mr. Ballens story the parrot? Either 1, the people are going to throttle it for it making its noise and biting at him, or 2, it's going to keep pecking the light fixture till it gets through to electricity and then ends up electrocuted.
Which, you know, to most people in the building, they didn't care so much about the light fixture, but the landlord did. And so it was just this general consensus that Polly is sort of nasty and loud and also damages stuff. So like nobody liked Polly, and they really told Alice that she needed to get rid of Polly, and soon, because he is a real problem. But Alice would not get rid of Polly. She loved Polly, and Polly loved Alice. He wasn't mean to Alice. He followed her around everywhere and was very sweet to her. And so Alice she felt very attached to this bird. In fact, in many ways, she viewed Polly as being sort of like her only family. You know, the only reason she was in this boarding house to begin with is because her brother and both her parents had passed away. And so a lot of time, it was just Alice and Polly in this room together. And so it was just a very important relationship. It was like the only relationship that Alice really had.
Okay.
And so Alice just walked over to Polly, who was still squawking loudly and pecking at this light fixture, and she just told him to stop what he was doing. And he listened. He went completely quiet, and, she pet him for a second, and then
Bird listens
a
to
moment
her.
later, she was back at her desk, back to studying, and for the next few hours, that's what she did, until her eyes got too tired to stay open, and she went to bed.
Right.
Hours later, in the middle of the night, Alice suddenly stirred awake, and she sat up in her bed. And she had no idea what caused her to wake up. But what she did know is something just felt wrong. Her chest felt incredibly tight, and she actually felt kind of dizzy. And so she got out of bed, and she stumbled her way over to the door to get help. But she didn't get there. After taking only a few steps, her legs suddenly gave out from under her, and she
heart attack.
fell to the ground. The next day, just before 1 p.m., the landlord of the boarding house bustled around the kitchen, putting some lunch on the table. And then when he was done and all the food was laid out for his guests, he called out to the house to let everybody know that lunch was ready and to come on down. And a few moments later, all the guests appeared at the table, except for Alice.
Obviously.
Now, the landlord immediately noticed this, and it did bother them. I mean, they hadn't seen Alice all morning. However, they did know that Alice typically stayed up late studying, so it wasn't all that unusual for her to sleep in.
Right.
But even by her standards, 1 p.m. was very late.
Oh.
And so the landlord decided they would just go up to her room and make sure she was okay. And so the landlord went down the hallway to the last door, which was Alice's, and they knocked, but there was no answer. So after trying a few more times and still not getting an answer, they just reached down, turned the knob, it was unlocked, and they opened the door. And immediately, as soon as that door opened, the landlord began to gag. So there were a lot of things about Alice's pet parrot, Polly, that really concerned people. And Alice, who loved her bird and considered it the only thing saving her from total awful loneliness, sort of looked the other way when it came to all those concerns. However, there was one thing that Alice should not have ignored, and that was her parrot's drug problem. So in 1899, interior...
Come again? Your parrot's got a drug problem. And listen, Mr. Ball, I know the truth is stranger than fiction, but a parrot has got a drug problem. Right, all right, okay, whatever.
That was her parrot's drug problem. So in 1899, interior lighting inside of homes was almost exclusively open flames. And those flames were powered by gas. And it would turn out...
Yeah, I'm thinking the electric. It's like 1899, isn't it? Okay.
Polly regularly liked to inhale that gas. He would basically get high. When he was pecking at the light fixture, he wasn't doing it just to make noise or to damage it. He was doing it to turn the valve in order to suck on this gas until he basically passed out. Now, Alice did know Polly did this, but she would typically stop him while he was in the process of trying to get high and just kind of keep him from doing it. Or if after he had turned the valve and passed out, she would just move her parrot and then close the valve.
The parrot got into such a state with the gas that it passed out. This is ridiculous. Oh my God. Polly's hitting that.
After he had turned the valve and passed out, she would just move her parrot and then close the valve. Or she would keep her window open to ensure that the gas wouldn't get trapped in her room.
Yeah, escape. Right.
But on this night, it was so cold outside, she shut the window, and then she fell asleep because she was so exhausted from all the studying. And it was after she had fallen asleep that Polly pecked the valve open, got high on the gas, passed out, and then the room continued to fill with this poisonous gas.
Shit.
So when the landlord opened up the door, the reason they gagged is they were hit by this surge of gas that had been trapped inside the room for hours.
Lucky that the house didn't explode. Do you know what I mean? People using open flames in other rooms. The gas would have still seeped under the door and stuff. Wow.
And then when they looked inside, they saw Alice's body lying on the ground by the bed, not moving. And then at the landlord's feet, flattened on the ground with their beak wedged under the crack at the bottom of the door, was the parrot.
He's trying to breathe.
Alice would die from inhaling the gas, but the parrot survived because he was able to make his way over to the door and breathe in that fresh air.
Well, as long as you're all right, Polly. Twat. What? That bird is a knob.
Survived because he was able
Was a
to
knob.
make his way over to the door and breathe in that fresh air. And so the parrot recovered and would continue to huff gas whenever it got the chance.
It's like Breaking Bad methods, but this time it's a gas head. I mean, come on. She should have got rid of that parrot ages ago. Telling you. The cancelled vacation. Jesus Christ, that was a crazy story, that. Fucking bird, smackhead.
Late one night in September of 1993, 43-year-old Linda Gowdy suddenly startled awake inside of her bed in her home in Stoneham, Massachusetts.
And she had a parrot called Polly that was pecking at the gas. She's startled awake the same as Alice in the last one.
She had just had this really horrible nightmare about how she was going to die. So in a few weeks, Linda and her boyfriend, whose name was Tim, were planning to go on a Caribbean cruise. And in Linda's dream that she just had, she had been on that vacation, and during that trip, she had basically seen herself dying in a car. And
right, okay, now we're going into the realms of Final Destination, aren't we? Premonitions, seeing your own death, death finds a way. And now she's in a Mr. Ballens video. Okay. Final Destination 20, or whatever number it's on now.
During that trip, she had basically seen herself dying in a car. And this dream, I mean, it was no ordinary dream. It had been so vivid, so awful, that even now, you know, she knew she was awake, but her heart was still racing. She was still dripping sweat. It was like she couldn't fully escape from this nightmare. And as she's just kind of sitting there with these horrible thoughts in her mind, she began to realize that this was no ordinary dream. This was a premonition. So Linda was a doctor. She was an obstetrician and gynecologist who worked at a hospital in Stoneham, Massachusetts.
I'm not going on holiday.
And by all accounts, she was excellent at her job.
Do you know what? Wouldn't it be a shitter now, like, if she said, right, I'm not going on holiday because I've seen myself die in a car crash on that holiday, so I'm not going. And then she died in a car crash in her own country. Can you imagine?
Not just because she was smart and experienced, but also because she was just naturally intuitive and had this sort of like sixth sense when it came to her work. In a lot of cases, trusting her gut and going off of her intuition had actually saved the lives of her patients and their babies. And so she sort of developed a reputation for being this way, and it had led to many patients actually traveling to her from all over the region to have their babies or just to see her in general, because it just sort of seemed like she was the person who could handle any problem, mostly because she would get ahead of it and sort of predict complications and treat them before they became complications.
Fair play.
But this sixth sense that she had did not just pertain to work. She also would have, you know, these sort of gut feelings or premonitions, like the dream she had just had, about her personal life. And almost always, you know, her intuition on these things or her visions of the future would pan out to be right.
I mean, I'm not a believer of like hypnotists, voodoo, like premonitions and stuff like that. I don't believe in fate and stuff like that. I believe things happens coincidentally. I'm not having it that she's like having premonitions and they're all coming true. Because some of them won't. Some of them might. Some of them might be a coincidence. You know what I mean?
On these things or her visions of the future would pan out to be right. So Linda knew that in order to literally protect herself, she needed to cancel her trip to the Caribbean. And even though she knew this was the right call, it didn't stop it from being hugely disappointing. She'd planned this whole trip. She'd been really looking forward to it, as was her boyfriend, Tim. And also, she sort of felt like this was an important trip for her relationship with Tim.
Right.
She had been with Tim now for 4 years, and he too was a doctor, and they spent all their time together at the hospital. They both worked at the same hospital. But lately, they'd been struggling and fighting a little bit more. Tim had sort of become pretty overprotective.
She didn't see that coming, did she? With the premonition, didn't see the fights coming and stuff. Maybe she could have like avoided them if she knew they were coming. That's what I'm saying.
Lately, they'd been struggling and fighting a little bit more. Tim had sort of become pretty overprotective of her. Like he was becoming sort of like controlling.
Possessive, yeah.
And so it was just sort of exhausting dealing with their relationship issues. And this trip to the Caribbean, she saw as like this easy way to like get out of their normal lives and work on their issues, but in a happy, sort of fun environment. It felt like they needed it for their relationship.
Yeah.
But now Linda knew she would not only have to break the news to Tim that they were going to go ahead and cancel this trip, but also she would need to go find something else, some other way for her and Tim to reconcile, call it a different vacation or some other outing or something to like break the norm, which had become sort of toxic.
So why don't you go and have a dream about it and then you can do it? You know what I mean? You don't have to think then, because you are the person who can see things coming. And if she dies in this with this premonition thing, then again, it's a premonition that didn't come true. You know what I mean? If she sees herself dying, avoids it and dies somewhere else.
So on this night, eventually Linda calmed down from the shock of waking up to this horrible nightmare.
Okay, yes, we're back to the beginning.
She laid back down and she just told herself that she would figure it out in the morning. Like, this was obviously bad, but at least she wasn't going to die in a car crash in the Caribbean. A few weeks later, on the night of September 30th, Linda stormed down the hallway of the hospital where she worked towards her office. Linda was fuming. So she should have been leaving for her trip to the Caribbean with Tim in just a few days, but she had gone ahead and canceled the cruise because of her dream, which Tim was very annoyed with her about.
Hang on. She's gone on a cruise and she saw herself die in a car. Last I heard, a cruise is on water. All she had to do, right, is if this cruise stopped at ports and people could get off for a bit, stay on the fucking boat. Or don't get in a car. You know what I mean? Don't cancel your holiday, but okay.
Cruise because of her dream, which Tim was very annoyed with her about. He'd been vocal about the fact that her reason for canceling this trip was ridiculous. And it had made things really tense between them. And it was already tense between them. So this is like doubly bad.
That'd be me, that.
And now, just a few minutes ago, they had actually run into each other in the hospital hallway because they both worked there together. And they had gotten into this huge fight about the cancellation of this trip. And other coworkers had actually overheard it. And so now Linda was not only mad, but also embarrassed, that other people saw her fighting. Yeah. And so as soon as she got into her office, she just slammed the door behind her and sat down and tried to focus on her work, reviewing patient charts and other things like that.
But she's mad.
She just couldn't. Now, Linda knew that canceling this trip was the right thing to do. She was sure that if she had gone to the Caribbean, she and maybe even Tim would have died in a car. Like, she knew that she was preventing that. But at the same time, she also just hated how this premonition was now further complicating her relationship.
Yeah.
And so now Linda just told herself to calm down. She took a few deep breaths and told herself, you have other things that are coming up that will help distract her from the drama of her relationship and this trip. Like, she had a massage she had booked for herself on her day off tomorrow, and she also had her college reunion this weekend. Two things she was definitely looking forward to.
Can you imagine running your life on a whim or a dream? And say, do you know, if that'd have been me that saying that are you messing? That is ridiculous. Do you know what? I'll go on the cruise. I'll set one of my mates just change the name. You know what I mean? We won't get in a car till we give you a bit of a peace of mind. You know what I mean? Then if one of us died, then you know what? If it wasn't me, I'd come back and say, do you know what? You was right there. Do you know what I mean? If it was me, then obviously I'd haunt her. I don't want to be in a Mr. Ballens video.
Tomorrow. And she also had her college reunion this weekend. Two things she was definitely looking forward to that so far anyways, she had not had a premonition about, so she had not canceled. Finally, around 8:15 p.m., when Linda's shift finally came to an end and she had left the hospital to make her way home, she actually was in pretty good spirits. Even though she had certainly not resolved things with Tim, they were still very much fighting. This Caribbean trip really had become a pain in both of their sides. Despite all that, Linda was determined that, you know what, she's not going to let this be just a constant drag on her life.
Right.
She needs to just live her life and just go forward, and in time, things will sort themselves out. 4 days later, on the afternoon of Monday, October 4th,
she's driving.
One of Linda's friends was driving towards the hospital where Linda worked. And this friend was very worried about Linda, since she hadn't heard from Linda since they spoke on the phone last Thursday, which in and of itself was not a particularly big deal, since they didn't speak every day. But this friend had also spoken to one of Linda's coworkers that morning, who was also worried about Linda, because Linda apparently didn't show up for work that morning, and the staff at the hospital were very worried, and they had even sent someone to Linda's house to check on her to make sure she was okay.
So it's a few days later. Is this the few days later where they should have gone on holiday and she's premonitioned that she's going to die on that day in a car accident, and it may or may not have been on holiday, so she may have died here, and the fact that she didn't go on holiday probably means that she died here. If this is what's going to happen here, then she should have fucked off to the Caribbean, shouldn't she?
And they had even sent someone to Linda's house to check on her to make sure she was okay, but she wasn't home. And Linda, she rarely missed work, and if she did, she called in. And so to find out that she hadn't called in and nobody knew where she was, combined with the fact that this friend has not heard from her, like the friend is thinking something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And so they were going to the hospital to basically get together with their coworkers to just get to the bottom of this, to figure out what happened to Linda. But now, as the friend turned into the hospital's parking lot, she could immediately see that something was terribly wrong here, because the lot was crawling with police officers. They'd completely roped off the whole area, and then there was this one big group of people sort of standing over at the perimeter.
Okay.
And so when the friend pulled up and parked their car, she got out and she rushed over to this group to see what they were all looking at. And when she saw, she just gasped. It would turn out Linda's premonition was eerily accurate, but Linda had misinterpreted it. So on the previous Thursday, when she had left work after that long shift and she's looking forward to her massage the next day and the college reunion that weekend, she's trying not to think about the toxicity with her boyfriend, Tim.
Yeah.
She heads out, to head back home and just be done for the weekend, but she never makes it home. In fact, she never leaves the hospital grounds, because shortly after leaving the hospital, Linda was attacked and strangled to death inside of her car. Linda had been convinced that the death in the car was going to take place in the Caribbean, and so avoid the Caribbean. What she didn't realize is that it had nothing to do with the Caribbean.
No way.
It was simply that she was going to die.
I had a premonition. I predicted that she was going to die in her own country when she should have been in the Caribbean or the Caribbean. That's it. I now believe in premonitions. That's it. I believe because I just premonitioned that. I didn't know that someone was going to strangle her. But if she'd have gone to the Caribbean, she'd have still been alive. I bet Tim's going like this now. See, I told you. He'll be going to all these people who talk to spirits like Ola Mae Brown in Ghost. Talk to her on the old psychic hotline and say, "You're dead. You're in a Mr. Ballens video, and I told you we should have gone on holiday. You wouldn't have been strangled in your car." Why am I ranting so much?
What she didn't realize is that it had nothing to do with the Caribbean. It was simply that she was going to die in a car. And she did.
I mean, to be honest.
Meaning, the premonition she had was right. She did die in a car. The location was just wrong. So Linda's boyfriend, Tim Stryker, was the only suspect in her murder. He had no alibi, and he still went on that cruise to the Caribbean without Linda, right after her body was found. And he was later caught paying a witness to give the police false information about seeing Linda with another man at the time of her death. However, Tim was never officially charged with Linda's murder.
Has Tim done it? Has Tim killed? Do you know what he's done? They've had an argument, haven't they? They've had an argument, like you said, in the hospital, and he's embarrassed her, and she's peed off with him, etc. So he's gone, do you know what? I've had enough of this. I'm going to make your premonition come true. So it wasn't really a premonition. It was Tim making her feel like she had a premonition, then he went and strangled her in a car. And to be honest, I won't be seen dead in a Saab, especially a gold one. Jesus Christ. Anyway, let's go.
Of her death. However, Tim was never officially charged with Linda's murder and denied all involvement. However, he was convicted of perjury and was sentenced to 4 years in prison, where he would die in 2011.
From what? He couldn't have been that old. 4 years of... Hang on. This was 1993? So you're talking like, what, 18 years later? Hey? The timelines don't add up to me. Didn't see that coming either. What a crazy story. I mean, I can see what he did. He probably paid someone to do it to get the police off his back because he had no alibi or no witness. But you should just stick to your guns and not pay somebody, unless he did actually do it. Right, truth is stranger than fiction. Next one. Someone else going to wake up in the bed. The Ring. Okay, we're going to get a girl coming out the TV to water. Scary girl. Samara.
On a spring evening in 1705, a middle-aged man named John...
1705! Mr. Ballens, where are you getting your stories from? And who told this story? Jesus Christ, 300 years ago.
On a spring evening in 1705, a middle-aged man named John McCall sat by his wife's bedside in Lurgan, Ireland, crying so hard he could barely catch his breath. His wife, Marjorie, had unfortunately just passed away minutes ago from what appeared to be a horrible fever. So John was actually a doctor, and a few days ago, when his wife came down with this fever, even though John had not been able to actually diagnose what was causing her fever, what he did know is that the fever was just ravaging her body and it was going to kill her. And so over the next couple of days, John just had to watch in horror as his wife basically just shut down. And now, in some ways, her death was like a mercy, but it was still devastating for John, in part because he felt so helpless. Like, he's a doctor and he couldn't save his wife. But now, you know, despite how unfair this whole thing seemed, John had to kind of like pick up the pieces. I mean, his wife, in many ways, was like his whole world. You know, they had kids, they had grandkids, you know, they were only in their 50s, but much of those 50 years have been spent together.
Okay.
And so now it's like he was this lost soul. And so he just looked down at his wife and he just reached out and he grabbed her hand, you know, the hand that he was so familiar with, and he squeezed it. And it was just limp. And it made it even more upsetting that like she was really gone. And then he looked at her actual hand and he saw the beautiful gold wedding ring that he had saved all this money for, that they both had loved so much. Just seeing that ring on her finger, on that limp hand of hers, it just sort of, it really reinforced the finality
it gives you PTSD,
of this moment.
doesn't it?
You know, he couldn't believe this had happened, but it was real. His wife really was gone. And so now, as John continued to cry and squeeze his wife's hand and just sort of reflect on this horrible situation, he also, in tandem, knew that he had to start thinking about her funeral. He would have to plan it really quickly so they could bury her really quickly. So at this time in Ireland, it was traditional to hold a multi-day wake when somebody died so that friends and relatives could have time to pay their respects before the actual
crazy,
burial
isn't it?
took
Having her on
place.
show like that, so everyone can come and see her. That is a crazy, crazy thing. I know I've seen like people have open like caskets and stuff, but they're all like done up into a coffin and stuff. They should just lie in there. Technically, you're just lying there in an open casket, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? The whole body's just there under a blanket, like she's asleep.
Friends and relatives could have time to pay their respects before the actual burial took place. But if somebody died from disease, like obviously John's wife had, something had caused the fever. He didn't know what, but it had to be some sort of disease.
Something contagious.
If that was the case, the wake was off the table. And the person was buried pretty much right away, just to prevent the sickness from spreading further. But even though John knew this, he couldn't quite bring himself to face that reality, the idea that his wife would be in the ground as soon as like tomorrow. But
what are you
for
doing,
right
John?
this second, John did not get up.
What are you doing?
You know, start making arrangements here. He just wanted to soak up the last few moments he had with his wife before she was in the ground. The following day, John stood beside his wife's casket as it was lowered into the ground at their local cemetery in front of a crowd of other mourners. Even though Marjorie, because of the disease factor, had not had a wake, John had still expected to spend this day focused primarily on grieving and thinking about all the things he loved about his wife.
Right.
But instead, he found himself on this particular day very fixated on something else: his wife's wedding ring. So John really wanted his wife's wedding ring, just to have something to remind him of
for a
Marjorie,
keepsake.
you know, and he loved that ring. It was something that meant a lot to him. But pretty much right after Marjorie had died, as part of the decomposition process, her fingers had begun to swell really badly, and he could not remove the ring from his wife's finger. Nobody could. Other people tried, they couldn't do it. And so ultimately, the decision was made to just bury her with the ring. And so, of course, that in and of itself was sad for John. He really wanted...
give it about 6 months, like when everything settles down, starts decomposing, it just slide right off. Go and dig her up, though. That's a bit of a grim thought, isn't it?
Wanted that ring. But also, as John stood there watching her casket get lowered into the ground with this ring inside, he was worried that Now her gravesite could potentially become a target for grave robbers. Now, grave robbing has been a thing as long as there have been graves.
Yeah.
But it was especially common in Ireland in the early 1700s when the story took place.
Wow, okay.
Because the country at the time was experiencing widespread famine and poverty, and people were desperate.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so things like gold wedding rings inside of graves became things worth taking. And so John just felt like, am I always going to be worried that my wife's final resting place is going to at some point be disturbed? But, by the time Marjorie was actually buried that day and people had sort of moved on, as much as John really wished that ring wasn't in there, that he had it, there was nothing he could do. And so he decided he would just try to honor his wife's memory in other ways. That night, John was back in his home in front of the fire with his kids and his relatives all around him. And they were all crying and laughing and sharing their favorite memories of Marjorie. And then every time someone told a story about Marjorie, they would all lift their drinks and they would toast to her. Now, for John, this was very cathartic. I mean, this definitely was helping him grieve. But John was also just exhausted from his grief. Yeah. And also the whirlwind of the last few days and just how wretched they had been. And so even though people definitely were intending to stay up for quite a while here, John, at some point in a lull in all the stories and laughter and crying, he stood up to head off to bed. But as soon as he did, as he began leaving the crowd and they're all kind of watching him, he heard a knock at the door. And so John sighed and headed towards the door, assuming it had to be, one or more mourners who want to come in and pay their respects and just sort of be there for him. But when he opened the door, it was not a mourner. It was something else entirely. And when he saw what was out there, it made his breath catch in his chest, and then suddenly he felt this shooting pain rocketing through his chest. Then he felt his legs buckle underneath him, and before he knew it, he was falling to the ground. It would turn out John had been right to be worried about the fact that his wife was buried with her wedding ring. Because not long after she was laid to rest, word had gotten out that there was this ring inside of her grave.
Shit.
And grave robbers, they dug her up. But just like John and everybody else who tried, the grave robbers also could not get the ring to come off of Marjorie's swollen finger. So they had to cut off her finger to get the ring.
Wow.
But when they did that, a very unexpected thing happened. Marjorie sat up and started screaming. So even though John was a doctor, he had been wrong when he thought she had died. I mean, he wasn't the only one. Lots of people thought she had died.
What the fuck?
However, nobody caught it, and they were so quick to bury her because they were fearful of whatever had caused her fever, that disease, that it would continue to spread, that they buried her while she was alive. Just nobody
and now
knew.
She's like that.
And then those grave robbers, when they cut off her finger, well, the pain of having her finger lopped off basically jolted her out of this catatonic state she was in, and she sat up and she was fully alive again. But when Marjorie basically stumbled from the cemetery, fresh from her grave, back to her home to tell her husband that, hey, I'm still here, when John opened the door and he saw his wife standing there covered in dirt and missing a finger and looking horrible, he was so shocked and so scared that he had a heart attack, and he actually died. John was buried in the same plot that Marjorie had just been dug out of. And Marjorie, despite what happened to her, she went on to live for many more years, just without her ring finger. And then when she finally did die, she was buried in the same cemetery and was given a headstone with the inscription, "Lived once, buried twice." That headstone is still at Shankill Cemetery in Ireland today.
That is the craziest. I don't know what's the craziest. Actually, no, no, they're all crazy stories. I mean, the bird getting high was a crazy story. I mean, her premonitions, I don't really believe that. I think someone just made that come true. I think Tim actually killed her. Probably. And then that, burying your wife alive, grave robbers woke her up. I mean, how long would she survive under there with a lack of oxygen? No way. No actual way did that happen. Wow. Wow. Come back. Frightened him. He died. I don't know. I don't know. I can't. My brain does not compute what happened there. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to check out Mr. Ballens' original video, and always make sure if somebody's died, they've not got a pulse. Or just prick the finger to see if the pain wakes them up. Don't go to the extreme of chopping the fingers off, man. See you next time.